Now we're going to talk some hurling. To do so, very happy to say, we're joined on the line by 8-time All-Ireland winner Eddie Brennan. Hey, Eddie.
Good evening, Joe. How's the form?
Nice to be able to say 8-time, isn't it?
I don't know. To one name I was never really called too long, but it was more Edward. If I was called Edward, I knew I was in trouble. So that's the only you got your official title when you're in trouble at home.
Let's start with Limerick-Waterford then, because everybody was very curious to see what Limerick was going to turn up post-league, and everybody was curious to see how Waterford would pitch up post-league, and then they weren't maybe themselves against Tipperary. So what did we see? What's your takeaway from this game?
I suppose it's maybe in between a little bit, because I think everyone points to the fact that Limerick lost, after 8 or 9 minutes. They were down 4 All-Stars after, their All-Ireland winning teams in Cian Lynch, Flanagan, Kyle Hayes and Peter Casey. And I think they kind of looked at it and said, well, Waterford even couldn't, do the business without those 4 guys. But if I'm in Liam Call's shoes, you're obviously a little bit disappointed. But in the broader scheme of things right here, right now, and obviously qualification is his priority, and you want to get qualified as quickly as you can, because Munster can be just an absolute minefield. But I think overall, if there's a time you want to take the Limerick scalp, it's maybe not that. That's after the match when you haven't succeeded. You can comfort yourself a small bit in that. But I think they've closed the gap. I think a little bit of decision making. You talk about even frees. I think Stephen Bennett possibly missed 3 frees, maybe 4. And that can be significant then in a match when the margins are so fine. But, you just once again, Limerick answered the questions. And we'll probably get into that in a few seconds. But yeah, look, overall with Waterford, they're close. Physically, they fronted up. I think it was a great match. I really enjoyed the physical aspect of it. I think there was 1 or 2 comments maybe said about that maybe Sean Stack missed 1 or 2 things, but I think Sean Stack done a really good job considering the pace and the intensity at which the match was played at.
Yeah, very little time in the ball for anyone, which is great, is what you want.
Oh yeah, it was just real championship stuff. I mean, if you got this in a Munster final or a knockout championship match, you're gone home a very satisfied customer, having paid your ticket into a match like that. So I thought it was really enthralling match, the energy levels. And I think, for both teams, probably their second match in 7 days, I would imagine there was a lot of sore bodies come Sunday morning, and the recovery, obviously, knowing that there's a little bit of a break for them, for the next 14 days or whatever it is.
Something very impressive about the Limerick resolve. You mentioned the injury situation. No Kyle Hayes, Seamus Flanagan, Peter Casey, and then they lose Cian Lynch after just 9 minutes. So that's a big blow. I mean, we've talked about Limerick's depth over the last couple of weeks and questioned how much depth there is. But that's a pretty hefty amount of All-Stars to suddenly be without. And right throughout the game, when Waterford pegged back in the second half level scores on 53 minutes, and I think at that stage you were thinking, this could be maybe on here. Waterford are sticking with them physically. Then Limerick just seemed to find another gear. 7 unanswered points, and the game feels over on 62, 63 minutes. And then Waterford come again. In fairness to them, they come again. They score 2 goals, all the momentum. They're within a single point. Now, often at that stage of a game, when a team maybe feels they're out the gap, 7 points up, and they get goal, they're shell-shocked. And often the team with momentum goes on to see it out. But again, Limerick almost at will. Steady. They respond with the next 2 points. They win by 3. And in some respects, I feel like 3 points puts a sheen on that scoreboard for Waterford. I think 7-8 points is more reflective of the gap between the sides. But talk to us about that Limerick ability to, go 7 unanswered points and then withstand the 2 goals. There's something very impressive about that.
Yeah, I think their in-game awareness is quite good, and I think what it is there's probably ultimate trust in each other, because they never seem to panic. They know that one player is going to come up with a big play, and with the injuries, Gillan delivers a phenomenal performance. Hegarty, despite the fact that he was going toe-to-toe with almost 3 or 4 different Waterford fellas, he's still able to pick off his points. He's still able to, find a moment where he just breaks out. And then for me, probably the standout thing and what really impressed me was, I think, Conor Boylan and Cathal O'Neill, 2 young guys, 20, 21 years of age. Boylan starts and he just is in the middle in the thick of all the physical action. I mean, at one stage, I think in the second half, he's going forward and there's a Waterford lad very close behind him, and he just runs into two of them and he drives them flying, and he still finds a way to win a ball. So Cathal O'Neill, I suppose some people maybe said, he had one or two wides. I was so impressed with the fact that he persisted in taking his shots. And I think that's the type of stuff that a manager loves to see with a young lad coming in. But it's ultimately both of their appetites for work, and that transfers. People wonder, where does that come out of? That comes from your training field. I would imagine the internal matches in Limerick are phenomenal at the moment. I'd imagine they're knocking lumps out of each other. I'd love to see it, because that doesn't happen by fluke when you get into the championship field, because ultimately training and what you do on the training field prepares you for what you're going to experience in the championship match. It doesn't shock you. It's nothing new. So the intensity of the Limerick training sessions, and obviously they're just relentless drive, their appetite for work, and obviously their belief in each other now. This comes from winning, Joe. So when you win a couple of All-Irelands and you're under the pump in a match and you're under pressure and you deal with, they were two big blows they took to cough up two goals like that. And again, the second goal in particular was just class, a real Waterford goal. And it suddenly puts the game in the mix. But again, come with the hour, come with the men. I thought for me, at that point in the match, it was probably the likes of Hannon. Hannon just said, look, not today. And I thought he was absolutely brilliant as well, ably assisted by Burns.
And do you agree or disagree that 3 points maybe flatters Waterford a touch? Are they that close to Limerick?
Yeah, I suppose if this was the All-Ireland final and Waterford managed to pinch us, I suppose that thing goes out the window a fraction, because it's the results. But yeah, no, I do. I take your point on board and say Limerick were probably just seeing it out and maybe just took their eye off the ball for a split second. I think that's something that Cody will probably want to address. But you are up against a quality outfit, and I think if there's one thing, Waterford equally, they didn't fold there when that match looked to be slipping away from them and missed a few wide. So yeah, I think maybe 4 or 5 points is probably in and around it. But at the same time, I think from Waterford, yeah, aspects they're disappointed with, but I think we're definitely looking at probably a little bit of a, definitely there's a trilogy possibly in the mix here at some stage. Maybe this year we could be seeing that. But definitely, I think these are two teams that are on a collision course at some point this year. They're going to meet again.
And look, if it is maybe 4 or 5 points as opposed to the 3 points at the weekend, that's still a big improvement on the 11-point gap of the All-Ireland final of 2020 and last year's semi-final. So they are making headway in that respect. The way you talked there about your sense of the Limerick training sessions, that the matches would be, I suppose, akin to what we would have said about your team at Nolan Park under Cody. For those matches to work and catch fire, I suspect a few things have to happen. One, Cody, or in this case John Kiley, leaves his whistle in his back pocket. Everybody has to understand this is full bore, we're going at it. And then the question I had for you, to what extent do you need 30 really elite players? Like, can those matches work if you maybe have 20 and then a big drop off with the next 10 or 12? Because I would assume it's pretty hard to get 30 of a certain level.
Yeah, no, I think that's the key point there, Joe. I'd imagine John Kiley and Paul Kinnerk and co would want the lads to just go at it, hammer and tongs, and say, look, lads, in match situations, we'll play then when the ref decides to blow the whistle. But other than that, we want to be the ones dictating the terms of engagement. We want to be the ones going in there. And ultimately, and I mean this with respect, you're not looking for protection off the ref. You're not looking for assistance from a ref. You're just going, the match has to be played on our terms. So that was something that we would have often spoken about, regardless of what the opposition bring. We have to play the match on our terms, and for that there has to be a huge appetite. But the key point in that, Joe, is, and you touched on it there, is the application of your guys who are the 16, 17, 18, 19, all the way up to 31, 32. And I think where that comes from and how you get that maybe is that if you have 1 or 2 stragglers that come in there and they do the sums and they're not buying into the whole squad ethos, I think they have to be removed quickly enough, because you have to have guys in there that are all vying for a spot. And again, I know sometimes you look at Limerick, say, no more themselves, you have a settled 15, and sometimes players, and rightly so, look at it and go, oh God, I don't think I can get in there. But, they may be 19, 20, 21, so they're playing for a future career. And I would imagine that in the one-on-one chats, that they're the ones where John Kiley is dangling that carrot in front of these guys and saying, there's opportunities here. And I heard him use the term, in his interview after the match, it's next man up when somebody gets injured. And what you're saying to your players is, if you aren't ready, if you aren't at the pitch, on the training ground, night after night, when we watch you and we're watching what you're doing nice and silently to see, are you ready and into our consideration? Well, when that call comes the day of a championship, like it did for Cathal O'Neill after 9 minutes, and you're not ready and you're not dialed in, suddenly the ship sinks. Suddenly it breaks down. And
so, like the 30th guy isn't going to be as skillful as a frontline player. Could you live with that? Like, was that was okay once the application and the work rate was there? Because you couldn't expect everybody to be, have all-star hurling skills, or did you need the 30th guy to be nearly as skillful?
I know, I suppose it depends what your training session is about. You could have a tactical training session where maybe the intensity levels or the gears, you're not going up through the gears, you're just kind of getting maybe some walkthrough stuff on movements and how you create space and all that. But if you were setting the tone for an internal match, you're probably setting the tone a couple of days out. And what you maybe don't need fully is, you don't need a beautiful exhibition game of hurling.
Right.
All you need is 33 or 34 guys that are coming in and they're ready to just, I suppose, take each other's lives on the pitch within the context of a match, where no stupidity applies. But all you want off of them is that it's, and I suppose quickly, Peter Barry used to say when we were training, he said, I hated when we had an internal match and the forwards were flying and scoring heavily. Whereas the match where we had 111 to 13 and it was a grunt and it was ugly almost, that's when you know your intensity levels are good.
And when you say set the tone a few days out for an internal match, what does that involve? Does Brian Cody send out a WhatsApp or a group text message to say internal match Thursday 7 o'clock? Is that all he needs to say?
No, but it would be unlike it. I think it would be, your training plan is, guys are getting their training schedule ahead, and players too will quickly spot, well, the Friday week maybe before a championship match. And obviously when you're in the current format, you don't get that privilege. Like I said, you don't get to play those internal matches, so the team sometimes can, there might be an opportunity to jump in. But you will probably set it at least a week or two in advance. Say, look, lads, you're earmarking 2 different days, and maybe on the Tuesday night of a skill session or something like that, you're saying, look, lads, Friday night, it's a full internal match. You land into training and you might be siphoned towards 2 different dressing rooms, 2 sets of jerseys, and it just creates an old edge to training. And lads are coming in, and and they're looking across. This is the part probably is that's important, is you're looking across and saying, am I with the probables or the possibles, or is it a general mix?
Yeah.
And that can sometimes really add a nice edge to the training session.
And which were feistier, probables versus possibles, or a mix?
I think probably if you want to get a real edge to it, it's probably the possibles against the probables. And it depends then what happens. But if the possibles, don't come out, and maybe sometimes the manager will go with those and try really prod those guys in some ways, or else the 2 coaches. I just recall one occasion with Laois where, I might have gone with the probables and Tommy and Niall went with the possibles, and they really poked the lads and they came out and they just polished the boys. So that type of scenario is what you're looking for. And ultimately, you don't want it to descend into stupidity, but you really, that's how, in my experience, you got that edge to your internal match.
And so paint me a picture here. I'm imagining Jackie Tyrrell marking you and a ball goes in and he absolutely goes through you. It's a hospital pass. He takes you out. It is beautiful. And then he stands on your hand for good measure. And you look over to Brian Cody and say, is that not a free? What happens then?
Well, usually you didn't look at Brian because there was no point. You knew the answer you were going to get. And I suppose I remember one evening being on the receiving end of a hospital pass, and Jackie was a bit closer to me than I would have liked on a ramming mission. And so I literally ended up just not catching the ball, trying to slap it straight back and protect myself to dilute the hit somewhat. But look, I think there's an element of that comes with it. And I suppose quickly, we were up in a training camp in Wexford one year where Jackie and Richie Hogan had a famous bit of a cut-in, and there was a bit of slapping and belting going on off the ball. And I remember at halftime when Brian pulled it in, there was just a general warning, and he kind of said to the 2 lads, Jackie, Richie, cut it out. It's stupidity and you're going to get sent off. the problem was Jackie was gone to the toilet. He never heard the warning, and it just returned to round 2 when the match started again.
Oh dear, great times.
Yeah, good times, all right. It might have felt it at the time, but look, it was where you get your edge. Again, in those same matches, I recall another evening looking out, myself and Michael Cavan in the corner, really good friends, and there was just attention to it. There was no talk, and outsiders, you had Tommy and Henry, and I think at one stage the two of them were rolling around the grounds, and the ball came into us unexpectedly. So, we didn't get to enjoy the spectacle that was going on in front of us.
God, it must have been amazing though to be part of that, to be looking around and by the way, sorry, I retract the Jackie standing on your hand part. That was just needlessly cynical.
He would do that.
Okay, well you can say that. You could say that. But it must have been amazing to look around, and I'd say you almost felt blessed to be surrounded by these absolute winners that on a Friday internal match, they're going at it with the same intensity as you. You've got a manager like Cody who's driving it on. I mean, man, you like a deep kind of satisfaction driving home afterwards, or in the dressing room afterwards, or chatting about it, afterwards when you all come together again and make friends. Like that's a pretty special environment that you won't always have.
No, it is, and I suppose at the time you maybe don't get to enjoy that as much as you do. But I've seen the Limerick lads, in the aftermath of their successes recently. Even there was a bit of fist pumping going on with them, last weekend. So there's a good spirit there. There's a real bond among them, and that's what we had too. We were very fortunate. But I suppose, there was always that kind of real sore, tired satisfaction.
Yeah.
But you knew coming off the field you were ready, and I think that was the big thing with us. We knew we were ready. That whatever the opposition threw at us, we were ready. There was nothing going to shock us. There was nothing going to be left fields. And I think obviously the key to that though. And we know in sport, unfortunately, 15 and you have your few after that. But those, that wouldn't happen unless those, the other guys apply themselves wholeheartedly. And I suppose that's the maybe the cruel side of sport sometimes is that you enter into that context and into that kind of environment with no guarantees, and there's no guarantees that everyone can get game time. But obviously, the collective is obviously the important thing, and that's probably the trick with a lot of teams is to get to that position. And Limerick look as if they're in that position, and it's working for them.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of unsung heroes behind the scenes that we don't see much of on the pitch. Just one last point on this Limerick-Waterford dynamic. The whole country really feels like, as you said, this could be a trilogy, certainly, or maybe if it's not a Munster final, then certainly a meeting down the line, maybe an All-Ireland final. And you do very well to listen to any podcast or read any piece now which doesn't say, oh well, look, Waterford aren't going to beat them twice, or Waterford aren't going to beat them 3 times. They're like, it's a good thing they haven't beaten them. And I've even heard suggestions that they might be better off not playing them in the Munster final, that once now and get them later on, because that'll be their best chance. I'm looking in from the outside. I find this very strange. Like I would have thought you want as many cracks at them as possible, and you do want to beat them in a Munster final. You want to plant as much doubt as you possibly can in Limerick minds, land a psychological blow, and then you beat them again in the All-Ireland final. I find it hard to accept that if you were to beat Limerick in a Munster final, it would lessen your chances further down the line, and yet it's what so many people in the game are saying. Can you give us your sense of that dynamic? And even from both sides, I mean, you've been with Kilkenny, you've been the Limerick, so I presume you wanted to beat other teams early and often and keep reminding them that you're the best. So your sense of this dynamic about this trilogy and what suits Waterford?
Yeah, well, I suppose the trilogy may not come to pass this year. It could be down the line. But yeah, no, your point is spot on. I think if I'm the Waterford, I mean, we might be saying that from maybe the outside the Limerick camp and saying, Jesus, this might be the only way, because we're looking at Limerick and seeing where are those cracks, where are you going to get at them, because they keep answering the questions and they're impressive. But I think I would be agreeing with you on that. I think if you're the challenger like that, you want to put a little doubt in their heads. You want to push that they suddenly now go home after a Munster final, licking their wounds, saying, oh God, these lads they've closed the gap and now they've taken us and they've beaten us on a big day. They've taken a Munster title off us, and now you're kind of worried about them. And yeah, you come back afterwards and you say, right, we'll figure out, or we'll analyse them or whatever. But I think if you're Waterford, you now need to know that we're capable of beating these guys. We're close to beating these guys. but now we'd like to do the job on them, and now we'd like to beat them a second time. And I think that has to be the mentality of Waterford, and I think Liam Cahill would very much look at it that way. So I understand people saying that, but I think if I'm in Waterford shoes right now, I want to beat these guys. I want to put a little doubt and start exposing a few, try find a few little cracks, find places that we can go after. But yeah, to finish the point then and say, if I'm in Limerick's position, you just want to keep opposition afraid. You want to keep opposition almost psychologically beaten before they come on the pitch, that they're kind of going, this, you hear the narrative in family and friends and geez, this Limerick team can't be beaten. I think that's what you will enjoy if you're in their position, because they have the experience. And maybe, look, some team is possibly going to take them out whenever that will be. But I think if you're in that position, and again, I just, from my own experiences, you're at the top of that ladder and you just want to keep pushing the lads back as long as you can, because it will be over at some stage for them, whenever that is. And like I said there, you said to me about the good times they're gone now, and it's a distant memory, and it's a great memory. But ultimately, when you finish your career, you look back on it and say, okay, geez, I'd love to have, done a little bit more. And that's the way I think Limerick look like at the moment. They have to hoover up as much as they can, and you keep opposition afraid of you and psychologically beaten as long as you can, or psychologically worried or doubting themselves as long as you can. That is how you'll continue to succeed.
Yeah. Traumatised. I think that's what she did to a couple.
Yeah.
Clare 321, Tipperary 216, 8-point win. Should be said it was a 16-point gap at half time. I saw in the Irish Independent you were writing your piece, and it's very clear you were massively disappointed in Tipperary. You said that they were bullied in their own backyard. It was a toothless display. They now have Limerick on Sunday week. You'd kind of pretty much write them off there. They are at a real low ebb. They're in transition both in personnel and playing style.
Yeah, I think, like I said, they are, look, always for me, and again, our own experiences. And I know I've been fortunate enough to play in Thurles and run into some massive challenges up there. And there's obviously that respect that there is, like you get a competitive, but they just lacked cohesion and stuff like that. And I suppose they put a lot into the Waterford match, and maybe they could have done with, getting a 14-day window to prepare for this match, because there was so much riding on it in the space of 7 days. With a young team, it has to be said, and devoid of a lot of experience. But nonetheless, I think they didn't seem to have a real purpose about them. And, like, say for Cahill Barrett and Craig and Morgan, I thought, like, there were two guys that just, and that's what you want from lads. That's what you want from people. And you'd be worried about them now because, from a tip perspective, but and it's very easy, in the aftermath to say that and go through it in a post-mortem and take maybe, the easy narrative with stuff like that. But I think the signs are worrying for Tip at the moment is that they just seem a little bit rudderless. And, you'd say for Colin Bonner, he's definitely, I don't think people, should or could turn on him. I don't think that would be fair. But he definitely has a big 12 months ahead of him, come what may, in 2 weeks' time against Limerick. But I'm not sure too many Tipperary supporters are very confident heading down to Limerick. I think it's in Limerick in 2 weeks' time, the 8th of May. And we spoke about this there in the lead into it, that this is potentially a massive match. Now it's Tipperary have to save their year. And you'd have to say now a lot is going to need to happen for them to resurrect that, because Limerick are going down there, bringing Tip into their backyard to secure probably a place in the Munster final.
As for Clare then, not spoken about very much in advance of the championship. Most of the reports across the winter were about county board officials at war with club delegates, and it all seemed like a fairly miserable situation down there. And I suppose, look, if you were to be really brutal about Clare, there is a sense that this team came, they won their All-Ireland in 2013. It was an odd year in some respects, and their playing style was very innovative and caught a few on the hop, and they've never really backed it up in any meaningful way. And I think most of the country have written them off as unlikely to back it up, and that's just where they are, and therefore they're not discussed all that much.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point, and look, there's a lot of water gone under the bridge now since 2013, and a nice few of that team have moved on. But I think Brian Lohan has probably brought a few of the real stalwarts of that there. Like Davy Mack has had his injury problems over the last couple of seasons. He looks really fit now again. He looked really good last Sunday. John Conlon is still there. Tony Kelly, without ever having a real Tony Kelly performance. And Peter Duggan has obviously returned, and Shane O'Donnell. So you have a couple of good leaders there. But I think what has impressed me about Brian Lohan is that he has gone about this. He has managed to keep the boardroom stuff and the mumblings and the noise that he has had to deal with. And I think he has to deal with a lot of stuff that was very difficult for him, and continue to keep the boys focused on what they're about. I think what he has probably instilled in that group, I think it's a very good achievement, and keep them as tuned in as they are, and as hurling as well as they are at the moment, and over the last couple of seasons. But I suppose, they have, I suppose in our preview 2 or 3 weeks ago, I did say that if there was to be a bolter, I felt it might well have been them, and they have put themselves in a good position now, because if they go along and inflict another blow against the second, big team in Munster, from a silverware point of view down through the history, they have an opportunity to put a little bit of light between them and Tipperary and Cork next week, and put themselves in a very strong position to advance. But look, they probably haven't delivered as much as they would have liked, considering those 321 All-Irelands. But at the same time, I think Brian Lohan has done a good job over the last couple of seasons, and I think now he has them in a position where they're ready to maybe have a cut. And look, if Limerick are coming into their yard in the final matchup, which I think is the draw, that'd be a very interesting game as well, because it could be the match that brings Clare back in if Limerick are secure. But if Limerick weren't, and Limerick have to go to Ennis, that has possibly a Titanic game written all over it.
Interesting. Clare went with the long puck out against Tipperary. Possession is king at the moment, but they were going long.
Yeah, which is unusual, and I just looked at that. I think Quilligan delivered 2 to his own 65, and then after that there was 4 or 5 to the 21. Other than that, everything was fired down on top of Tip, and I think they attacked an area that maybe Tip had got good strength or had good returns against Waterford in the high puckouts down to the half back line, and they placed a mix of really good lively fellas there and a couple of big fellas as well. So but ultimately it was their work rate, when the ball got to grounds, and he was able to deliver long to Duggan on the edge of the square too, just on the edge of the D. I think he hit him a good few times. They just seemed to have a work ethic about them around there. And also what impressed me was, you have 2 big guys down the spine. It's a little bit traditional the way Brian Lohan is playing, but it worked very effectively. Fitzgerald at centre forward and Duggan at full, and a couple of smaller lads moving around outside him. And you had, I think Dermot Ryan coming up the field, another big unit picking off a couple of points. So they have a good setup in place, but I think where I will really like to see the value of that is going to be maybe against Cork this weekend, but particularly in the last match against Limerick, and how they set up. Say, will they go after them in the same area? Because that is the area that Limerick have a real strong setup, is their half back line. And if they're going to go toe to toe with Limerick there, I think that's going to be an intriguing one, and hopefully there'll be something at stake.
And Eddie, a word on Cork Clare, Semple Stadium, 2:00 Sunday. Waterford showed there is a good way to lose to Limerick, and Cork showed how there is a completely demoralising way to lose to Limerick. Problems in the defence have been well flagged and they weren't solved, and the space that we saw allowed for the Limerick goals is just, you got your head in your hands if you're a Cork supporter. I think the game probably just would have copper fastened in the Cork players' minds and everybody watching, that they just don't have the size to compete with Limerick. And for like a day one of the championship, when you're All-Ireland finalists and you're trying to go again, it was such a stark, unavoidable reminder of the gap. And you could just see, if they're not careful here against Clare, you could just, the backside could fall out of their season, because it was such a demoralising loss.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's a very simple approach. They know what they're going to get with Clare. Clare are going to come with, they're happy in Thurles. They got a good gallop out there, 2 days ago. So Thurles, for any team, that's no issue. Same for Cork. Cork will surely enjoy coming to Thurles. But I think the bottom line for Cork, and you can dress it up whatever way you like, they have to front up, they have to man up, they have to get stuck in, they have to win the physical battles, because Limerick and Waterford and other teams like that, and Kilkenny and the Galways of this world, when they hit the knockout championship, you have to go in where it hurts. And you can have lovely tactical stuff when you do get your hands on the ball and there's a certain way you want the game to play. But I think, as I said about Clare, I think Kieran Kingston, will know if he looks ahead what he's going to get off a Brian Lohan team and what he's going to get off this Clare team, very, very simply. And if Cork don't roll up the sleeves and be willing to go in where it hurts next Sunday, their season is going to hang by a thread, because Clare, that's what Clare do. They have hurling, there's no doubt about that. But you're going to have to earn it. You're going to have to win and win that dirty ball. Be willing to have, take hits, take belts, and do that without losing your focus.
Before we wrap up, much of the build-up to the weekend is going to be about Galway Kilkenny for obvious reasons. Pearse Stadium, 2:00 Sunday. You're pretty uniquely placed to tell us about the dynamic here between Cody and Shefflin. What would you have said about their relationship as coach-player?
I'd say they had, I suppose no more than a lot of us, I personally feel that Henry would have had a very, very strong relationship with Brian. And again, look, I suppose the one thing I'd say, Brian never really had too many favourites in there, and if there were, we didn't know about it, because he generally, in fairness to him, treated us all very, very evenly. But I'd say that if there was anyone there to be the special son, maybe, or the guy for a little bit of extra treatment, it was probably Henry to a point. But look, I suppose I say that tongue in cheek, but no, look, they had a very good relationship. But again, I think with what's coming there this weekend, I think it's just business for both of them. But I think there is going to be a little dynamic to that, because Brian Cody just loves challenges. He loves he loves what he's doing, and he will look at this. They're going to Pearse Stadium next Sunday, knowing that if they can get a win, they're good. They're in a really strong position now to see out the Leinster campaign. And if he doesn't, in doing so, if he wins, he's going to put Galway under massive pressure. And I said it there earlier on the week. I believe this is a must-win for Henry or this Galway team. They have to win the match because otherwise it now puts them in a real quagmire with other teams, and knowing that Dublin are in the last round and they may well have to win that, then it just puts a little bit of pressure on them. But I'm just looking forward to, I suppose we'd love to see manager cam for this match and just see our sideline cam or something like that. But no, look, I don't think there's no fear of sparks or anything of the sort. I don't think anyway, because I think the two boys have too much respect for each other. They will focus on what's important, and they won't create a sideshow that's going to distract their players.
Would you have been considered one of Cody's favourites?
I might take the fifth on that one, Joe. Yeah, look, I don't know. Brian Cody was very good to me over the years, but look, his approach to me, I suppose at times was I needed a bit of tight marking at times, and I make no bones about that. And Brian, I think Brian knew that as well. And I'll definitely say, on reflection, hand on heart, that that's what worked for me.
Fair enough. And when you say, Shefflin had a special place in his heart, so Shefflin's this unbelievable player, obviously, so we can see the greatness on the field. Presumably it goes beyond that. Was there something about Shefflin's personality or his work rate or his dedication Cody respected? Are you talking about almost in the warm-ups, where if Cody's having a quiet word with anyone, it'd be more likely to be Shefflin than others? Do you suspect they were talking more outside of training? But what is it that leads you to kind of say that maybe Shefflin was one of his favourites?
I think it was because Henry, I think if and I maybe said this before, if I put Henry Shefflin, Richie Hogan, TJ Reid, Richie Power maybe in a category and say we're going to analyse them, I think without a doubt the other three might have been a fraction more naturally talented, we'll say. But what Henry Shefflin had, and don't get me wrong, he had loads of talent, but what he had more than anything was an attitude and an application to work. And he was relentless in that, in terms of the injuries he came back from. And I think what Brian Cody would always say, and he said to us, hurling is hurling, guys, and you're in here because you're able to hurl. I would be able to put the ball over the bar if you give it to me on my own. But it's ultimately how hard you work. And there was matches there where Henry Shefflin just literally took grabbed Kilkenny by the scruff of the neck and dragged them along with him. You know, Galway in 2012 in the drawn match, in the second half he done that. 2007 against Galway, again, I remember him at centre forward. He just fronted up. Waterford, 2008. There was matches like that where Henry Shefflin just outworked. And I'd say even privately, when he was recovering from injuries, we won't know half the stories about what he done and how hard he worked. And I think that's one thing that Brian Cody really respects in any player. And, you know, maybe Tommy to that extent as well. Just they just had a competitive nature in them and a relentlessness in pursuit of what they wanted to achieve.
And would Cody have, say, a cut-off in the dressing room? I asked that, for instance, Alex Ferguson famously, if he wanted Ronaldo to stop dribbling so much, he'd point to Rooney next to him and say, "You effing stop dribbling so much, Rooney." Or equally, if he wanted Ronaldo to work harder, he might point to Giggs and say, "You need to bloody work harder." Would he use Shefflin in that way?
No, not really. I think one thing Brian Cody always did is he trusted our hurling. He trusted our abilities, our skills and stuff like that. He would have very, definitely categorised that and took that as a given in terms of you're able to hurl. That's why you're in here. But ultimately, he had a little saying that was mean, hungry, ruthless people was what he wanted in his team. He said, "I want the guys that are going to go in and get hurt." And I think he would have always brought it back to simple stuff when he wanted to poke us a little bit. That was the stuff he wanted. He did not want magic off any of us.
Okay.
But he just expected that was where it was. And I think, Henry was that. I think there's no doubt about that. And I can safely say hand on heart there were guys in that dressing room that inspired me because of that type of action. So they're the kind of lads that they're not talking, but by their actions, they drag you along with them. And you see him going in there and maybe mixing it up with 2 or 3 opposition players. And you kind of go, no, he can't be left in there on his own. And that was the way it was. And that's the stuff that Brian Cody put such a value on. That is his currency.
Yes.
And that is just, there's no compromise on that. And I think sometimes when, I think of guys that came and went out of the panel, that was the way it was. Maybe their work rate and their application just wasn't where he wanted it, and once he got that, the hurling would take over. That if you went in and you worked and got the ball, then your hurling instincts take over and off you go and you do what you do.
Do you feel like your values as a manager have been shaped by that experience under Cody, and therefore do you think Shefflin is very much forged through the Cody school? Like you can't look at Martin O'Neill and not see Clough. Do you think you and Shefflin, are you formed in the image of Cody, or are you different, do you suspect?
You'd probably be different in your own. Obviously, everyone, you have to have your own philosophy. I can't be Brian Cody and I can't be Henry Shefflin either, and vice versa. I think you obviously have to put your own spin on things, but you are a product of your environment, and you can put it down to say it's learned behaviour. What you're exposed to, the fundamentals, you'll obviously subconsciously maybe find yourself, drawing yourself towards those and putting huge value on those stuff because we saw the importance of that stuff. And obviously then it's your own philosophy and what you want to bring to it and to be able to use different aspects of it to make, to shape your team or what you want your team to do. So I think without a doubt, I think that's the basics where Henry would have probably started, is just get the very, very simple things right with Galway and then, take it from there. Obviously, look, I suppose he done that with his own club in Ballyhale, albeit, a very talented outfit. But there's no doubt about it. You are what you've experienced, and you can see where that stacks up and how that will benefit you when the pressure comes on, and how important that is. And if the fundamentals like that are right, then you can put your little add-ons to that.
Yeah. Kind of curious, at full time, will there be a handshake and a stop and a few words and smiles, or will it be millisecond of eye contact, handshake, off we go?
Yeah, I suppose it depends how much action is close to the two of them and what the score is. If it's hot and heavy there for the last couple of minutes and there's a bit of action nearby and there's a couple of frees, but it is a strange one because Henry Shefflin is ultimately, coaching a team against his own teammates and his own nephew. So that's a tough one in fairness. But no, look, I no matter what happens, I think you'll definitely see the Brian Cody kind of stare maybe initially, and when the whistle goes, then he'll laugh and he'll shake hands with Henry. There's very deep respect between the two of them, and I think I think it would take something astronomical to change that, no matter what happens on Sunday.
Yeah, no, it would. I like it's going to be in its own way like a beautiful moment in some respects. Full time, those two embracing each other in a smile, and welcome to the big leagues, kid, from Cody, and the fact that he's still there. It's an amazing thing in so many different ways.
Absolutely, two competitors, Joe, and that's the big thing. I said you're going to see two competitors, and Brian Cody will relish the challenge of Henry, stepping up, because they're going toe to toe. That's the reality. The two boys are going toe to toe, and neither will want to blink, neither will want to come out second best. But I think there's obviously a very, very healthy respect there. But I think it's a great challenge for both of them. Brian will love not more than to say, I'm still here, I'm still standing. And maybe Henry to the same extent would love to say, I've been able to take out a Brian Cody team, which in the broader scheme of things is great reassurance for him maybe as a manager. Finally,
who wins that one? Sorry, I'll rephrase that. Are you team Shefflin or team Cody?
Oh, I'm team Kilkenny. Does that answer your question, Joe? But no, I was in at the match the weekend against Laois, and I think Kilkenny are in a good position to go up to Galway. I think a few years ago they got bullied up in Galway. They got physically out-muscled in Galway. I think they're in a good position. I think, if you look at maybe Conor Whelan is a loss to Henry's team. But I'd be confident that Kilkenny are going to get out here. Might be by the slimmest of margins, but I think they're in a good position to get a win in Galway.
Listen, super. Great having you on. Thanks so much, Eddie Brennan. Great stuff.
Massive stuff. Thanks, Joe. All the best.